Well, hey everyone, my name is Nathan Jones, and if you're new here, welcome. I like to talk about all things movies, specifically Blu-rays, and pardon my energy and also my throat. I am coming off some kind of viral thing, which is why this actually did not end up over the weekend, because I caught it on early Friday and just felt it the entire time. In fact, I'm off at the moment as I'm recording this, but my energy levels have been fluctuating. But today I want to talk about this amazing box set, the Ju-On, the Grudge Collection from Arrow Video. So there are 6 films in this thing, and I'm going to talk about that and how I watched all these for the first time, except for The Grudge, which is the 4K in here, and talk about my experiences going through that, through my film journey. And if you haven't been keeping up, I've been doing a weekly journal every single day, or actually every single day of the week. I've been recording what I've been picking up, what I've been watching, and each week I've been putting out a video that encapsulates the entirety of what I've been watching. And actually for October, I've decided to do 3 videos in a row of box sets. The first one being Ju-On, the Grudge Collection, and then there's going to be 2 more box sets I'm going to be covering: the Mexico Macabre set from Indicator and the Danza Macabre set from Severin Films. So I'm going to be talking about those films in my next kind of collection of updates for my weeks, and then I'm going to culminate that all towards a 31 Days of Halloween, where I'm going to talk about all of the films outside of those, box sets that I'm talking about. I'm going to be talking about all the films that I've watched. So I'm excited to do that and dive into a really spectacular October. But like I said, pardon my voice, and let's jump into Ju-On, the Grudge Collection. Alright, so before we jump into the box set, I do want to cover J-horror and my history with it a little bit before I jump in. In fact, a few years ago, I actually picked up this book, the J-horror by David Collott, and it is the definitive guide to The Ring, The Grudge, and the Beyond. And I just dove into this. In fact, I was doing a collaboration video and it kind of fell through, but at the same time, I watched a lot of Japanese, J-horror films, including Ringu, and I think I watched Pulse at the time, and there was just a great number of kind of J-horror films that I watched, and one of them was Ju-On, The Grudge, which I will talk about today. But I do kind of want to cover this book in general. It is a great guide for people who are interested in this movement in Japanese horror. It really did take off kind of in the 90s and went all the way up until maybe the mid-2000s. This book came out in 2007, I believe. This is when it was first published, so it was definitely capturing that phenomena, especially towards the latter part of the 90s and the early 2000s, which is where a lot of these films came about. And there are a lot of wealth of really good references into this, this phenomena of Japanese horror films that were coming out around this time. Of course, there was a lot of Japanese horror films from before, from like Kwaidan or Kiraneko, Onibaba, to just name a few. Japanese horror films have been in the zeitgeist for a long, long time, and even in Godzilla, I would even argue, is a horror film, especially for the Japanese people during the time and what it represents. But going back to the 90s and the 2000s, covering this entire time period and the virality of a lot of its spirits, because a lot of these spirits happen to kind of just touch past with people who are either coming in contact with a house, a la The Grudge or Ju-On, or a videotape like Ringu. And there is just this virality aspect to it that I thought is really, really fascinating for this time period and also for a lot of these films. So before we jump in to the Grudge box set, I do want to cover 2 films from 1997 that I watched also recently that I both, just spoiler alert, both of these movies are 5 out of 5 stars films. These are movies that I am going to rewatch when I get the chance, and I absolutely love them. But I think these two of these films kind of set up a lot of the precursors to something like where Ju-On would lead to. So let's talk about them. One is actually an animated film, and the other one is a director who has already made some really wonderful things, and I already mentioned one of his films, Pulse. But let's talk about Cure, real quick. So let's talk about Kiyoshi Kurosawa and the films that he would inspire. In fact, Shimizu, who would direct the Ju-On films, did a lot of work with Kiyoshi Kurosawa, who did Cure, which came out in 1997. This is probably one of the most terrifying, police procedural / thrillers, horror films, where literally the entire atmosphere is just dread. The entire, everything, you can just sense there is this thing lingering in the background of what's happening to this one detective who is just trying to get to the bottom of these unexplained murders where there's these X's that are starting to come across some of their victims. But again, goes back to the virality aspect of it. It seems to be a viral thing where you really can't pinpoint on who is doing these things. And there is one particular, character that we run into that he is constantly questioning in this film and constantly asking him what is, tell us more about this thing that's happening and tell us more about yourself. And the person who is responding is just keeps asking, who are you? And keeps asking the detective who he is. And there is something more to that, and I won't spoil it. But this movie kind of just dropped me how much I loved this film and how much it really did impact me and how much it still impacts me even thinking about it right now. Criterion did a fantastic job with this film, and I'm so excited to finally have this. I have the 4K digital restoration right here. There are some not too many special features in here. There's a conversation between Kurosawa and filmmaker Hamaguchi, and then there's interviews with two of the actors in the film and an interview from 2003 with Kurosawa. The trailer's a teaser, and then there is a film essay inside it as well. Right there, which there is a haunting image right there. That's actually one of the best images of the film, which I won't spoil. But yeah, this lighter that just keeps popping up. It's a chilling film, and it's one that I highly recommend people jump into. Don't go into it knowing too much if you have not seen it before. And I know I kind of just covered it with some of the weird happenstances going on, but definitely go in a little bit blind and you'll enjoy it. But yeah, 5 out of 5. Kiyoshi Kurosawa definitely was one of those people who did a groundbreaking thing for J-horror and for the films, like I said, that Ju-on would eventually inspire. Now, one that is kind of on the opposite end, or at least in the medium size of it, because it is an animated film, and one from Satoshi Kon, one actually of his most famous horror/thriller films, Perfect Blue. Another 5 out of 5 film, spoilers, of a movie where this is really an identity crisis of sorts, and shown in a very visceral and very disorganized and disjointed way, that like really attacks the viewer themselves who watches this movie. But it is about a woman who is a pop star who wants to turn actress, and there are some people who are a little obsessive with her and her fandom from her pop star days, and some strange things start happening in the background where there might be this website ran by her. It was like a fan club that it may or may not be ran by her, and these strange murders starts happening as well, and she has moments of memory lapse where she doesn't know where she's at, and a lot of things are just transpiring into this industry that she's trying to break into with the film industry from that pop star side, and doing things that she normally wouldn't do, and a lot of things that are really kind of controversial, but at the same time very eye-opening to the industry itself. And I won't explain too much of it, but it is an adult-themed film, so I definitely would recommend people watch this movie with knowing that going in. But again, another film just like Cure, one that's very unsettling, that one that just crawls under your skin and just stays with you, and is a film that is only going to get better in age. I need more space with this one than I do The Cure. I just said The Cure. I'm not talking about that band, although great band. Robert Smith. I'm glad you're back. But anyway, Perfect Blue. Check this film out. I'm so excited to finally have these films in my collection. That's a Japanese horror thriller of sorts that, again, like I said, would eventually break into these films themselves, talking more about the J-horror aspect of this time period in the early 2000s when Ju-on came onto the scene. So let's talk about this. So what does Ju-on mean? Ju-on is a name given to a deadly curse spawned about when somebody dies in the grip of a violent rage. So all who come around in contact with it are doomed. And that really is the premise of a lot of these films. There are 6 films in here from the Ju-on Grudge collection. I have all of the films in a different order. So there are 2 originals that came out in the same year that we'll talk about first. So let's pull those out. They are Ju-on the Curse and Ju-on the Curse 2. So these films right there, those are the original Japanese art pieces there. There's actually a commissioned artwork that Arrow did that I also enjoy. but I prefer the original artwork personally. Now, around this time, videotapes were a really big deal in the format, but also like especially in Japanese media, which I am not privy to. So, but I'm going about this from a secondhand account, of course. But knowing that, thinking about the elements of home media and films in general, being picked up at the video store and being rented and being kind of a word of mouth thing with some internet things that are maybe more like blogs, things that would like spread the Blair Witch Project, for instance. This was an interesting time period and one that is hard to replicate now because of technology advancing so much. But going back to this time period in the early 2000s, in fact, I think this came out in 2000 when both came out. So this is a part 1 and part 2. So this is actually my favorite of the bunch. I would give these movies a very solid score, which we'll get to in a second. But these are the ones that have the original concepts for this grudge that is kind of cursing anybody who comes near this home. And there are two people right here, so I'm going to talk about them, Kayako and Toshio, who are the two spirits in these films. Kayako being the mother, and Toshio being the little son, and also kind of a cat too. We'll get to that in a second. But these are the two spirits who have died in a violent rage. And we see flashbacks and hints of that, especially in these first two films, of what exactly happened to them and why they're haunting this place and this apartment that looks very ordinary, very, very much like a space we would all live in, right? And it's very terrifying in that aspect. In fact, I think this is actually probably the most effective, at least personally for me, the most effective way that these films portray. In fact, I was very blown away by these because these are first time watches for me. I had watched The Grudge, which we'll get to here in a second, which is technically the theatrical production of these two films, because these two films, like I said, were only available on video. So they were never theatrically released until they finally, got picked up and had a bigger budget. So it was really interesting kind of seeing the lack of budget and seeing the different scares and makeup and lack thereof, and really just having such a low budget, being in one location for the most part. It was really fantastic, and I loved both of these aspects. Now, one interesting thing about the second film is it does recap the first film in like the first 25 minutes, and they're both really short. They're not that long. I think both of them are, relatively a little over an hour, but I think these are very effective in the space that it does confine, because of the fact that it is just trying to show these random stories that are all connected to the house and to these spirits. And I didn't actually mention the story itself is fractured itself in different vignettes, kind of going between present and past. And I actually really like that aspect, particularly in these films, because it kind of shows you different people who come in contact with the spirits and how they went about and how they got there in the first place. How did they get to this house? And seeing that transpire is quite terrifying. In fact, one of them in particular, especially in like the first part, which is my favorite of the parts, there is a cursed number. The number 4 is one of those cursed numbers in Japanese culture. So there's this woman who keeps getting phone calls, and you see 4444444 as the number that is calling her, until it eventually, you just hear the which actually I kind of sound like right now because I don't have this viral thing, right? But yes, I adore these films, and they are quite terrifying. And this is where we see Kayako come down the stairs for the first time, which is quite gruesome and quite scary. I really love the fact that this movie set a precipice for what was to come. But definitely recommend people check this out. It's got some really interesting special features as well. It has the introduction from Takashi Shimizu, who directed all these films except for the last two, which we'll get into. But he's the guy who created these films. So there's also an introduction by Tako Fuji, who is in here as well. And so that is the first disc, is the first two Grudge home video films that came out. Next, I want to talk about Ju-on the Grudge, the one that is the namesake, the one that is on 4K. Actually, Arrow put out a 4K of this film, and it looks pretty good, even though it is definitely a film that, looks it looks pretty ordinary. Not gonna lie, and when I say that, I mean more so it's an ordinary piece of the locale and the locations, and there is definitely a bigger budget because those first two films were something where there were home videos, and this is the theatrical release. But this is a retreading of the tale, but told in a different way and in a different light, and more terrifying things happen in it. And there are some rehashed things that happen in the original like videos, but a lot of people hadn't seen that, and so they had a better time kind of recreating that in this edition of it. But this is a really good looking 4K. I was going to say it's interesting to have all the films not on 4K, but just this one. But there is the original poster art, which I enjoy the most. And then there is also the commissioned artwork right here, which also looks pretty good. But again, this is the release that has probably the most stuff in it. Actually, we'll say it has quite a bit of special features, with a bunch of audio commentary, and there's actually a commentary by Sam Raimi and Scott Spiegel. Sam Raimi actually picked up this after watching this film, and really enjoyed it so much that he is the one who produced the Grudge film that would come over in America with Bill Paxton and Sarah Michelle Gellar, which I actually just recently rewatched, and we'll talk about that at kind of near the end. But it was interesting kind of thinking that phenomena with The Ring being a really big deal around this time period, that finally there was another Japanese J-horror film that was coming over to the American audience. But this film set it all up, and really just kind of showcases the brilliance of this idea of this transmitted disease, this anger, this grudge that is holding on to its victims, with several people in here, with Keiko, the actress who plays her, which is really fun. I loved her kind of reminiscing about what she was doing during this time, and also just being a part of a lot of these films. And she comes back in the Grudge 2, which we'll talk about here in a second. And it has the evolution of the Ju-on, talking about, there's two authors with Tom Miss and Zach Davison, kind of talking about it through a series of vignettes that's more like a film essay, talking about what this time period was for Japan, and like what a lot of these films would do for the the local scene, honestly, and for the international scene. Through a Glass Darkly interview with Takashi Shimizu, the director. Whispers in the Dark, an archive interview with Megumi Okina as her role as Rika, and also Mariko. And there's some cast and crew. This one is the most stacked of all of them, and this was quite a good watch, and definitely my second favorite of the bunch. Because you know what? It's hard to believe, but the Curse, the Ju-on the Curse, and Cursed Part 2 are the ones that I actually enjoy a little bit more than the Grudge. So let's actually move on to the Grudge 2 right here, and here is the theatrical cut right here of the poster, and then there is the commissioned artwork as well, which is a little bit more terrifying. Now this one ups the ante. This one is a little bit more violent, a little bit more gory. You can just tell by this. There are some really cool postcards. I haven't mentioned all the postcards in each of these releases, but it's just a really cool kind of dive as we dive further into this disease that is happening and plaguing everybody who comes in contact with it. But like I said, this ups the ante a little bit. It kind of retreads some things a little bit, but it's where a TV program is kind of this is where it starts off, where a TV program is kind of capturing this place and trying to understand why this has all these murders connected to it. And of course, the people who are investigating and the ones who are there are going to get cursed as well. And it gets pretty wild. And I love a lot of the new designs in here. In fact, there are some treads that would come over from this into the new American Grudge that would come out, I think, shortly after this film, because this movie came out in 2003. And I think the 2005 might be the original Grudge, 2003 or 4. Regardless, this movie definitely inspired, especially like with the hair coming down, in this definitely black spot in the ceiling. It's a quite terrifying scene, and definitely recommend people check out this movie. But I'm ranting now because the fever's starting to kick in, but this movie is quite good, and I definitely recommend people check this one out as well. And then finally, there is the Black and White Ghost, the double feature here from 2009, which is actually technically I guess, the 10th year anniversary for The Grudge. And so these are actually directed by two different directors, Ryota Miyake and Mari Asato, which is the White Ghost and then the Black Ghost. So in White Ghost, the funny thing about the White Ghost is these movies are like, a little over an hour, and definitely like a tribute to the original the original Grudge films. And these were definitely adjacent, but not necessarily connected to the Grudge franchise. There is some Toshio, pop-ups. He pops up in both movies, which I really, really enjoy those moments, and seeing him just kind of be there, watching some horrifying things happen. But in White Ghost, it's more around Christmas time. Another very terrible thing happened in this one apartment, and the ghost in particular in this one is one who is an older lady, an older grandma. You can kind of see her right there. Her face is definitely more mangled and definitely looks a little bit more cheap with the practical effects, but she carries around a basketball and does some pretty crazy stuff, and there's some pretty interesting jump scares that happened in the movie. But White Ghost was an interesting one, but I actually think I prefer Black Ghost a little bit more, which you can't see in here, but you can see the eyes that are haunting underneath, which very fascinating stuff there. But also there is the alternate cover right there. But with Black Ghost, directed by Mara Asato, she is actually a really fantastic director. I think did a really wonderful job showcasing a more psychological and feminine side of this spirit, because it's talking more about motherhood, and there's actually a really interesting concept about this being passed on through pregnancy, which I thought is a very strange and wild way to take it, and I thought it was a lot more original than maybe in the White Ghost. But I really quite enjoy that aspect. There it is in that room, a pregnant woman who eventually will give birth to the Grudge, which is quite a terrifying scene. So, but regardless, it was a fun venture to jump into these, and has a couple of special features in here as well. And then the last thing I want to cover with this box set is the booklet itself, which is really great. I will say there is one little detractor here. This has very loose paper. In fact, some of this may have already fell out because of me reading this, which is kind of not great. But I only read it once, right? And that already happened. But you can already see this is falling apart. But I did quite enjoy the different cast and crew kind of breakdown. And then there's about 5 people who kind of talk about The Grudge and talking about J-horror in general. So it is a really cool booklet. But this box set in particular, and this entire idea of The Grudge, is quite a fascinating one, and one that has persisted to today. And like I had said, it had shifted over to America around this time period before Black and White Ghost came out. The Grudge came out in America and haunted audiences and became this own thing, but we Americanized it just like we did with The Ring. It definitely retreaded for a more American audience and less on what would scare a Japanese audience. That's another thing too, that is another rabbit hole I could go down. But man, this is a fun box set, and I definitely recommend people check these films out. If you're into horror at all, definitely check this box set out. Check out Perfect Blue and Cure. These two films in the Japanese horror lineage are just fantastic. Again, 5 out of 5 films. These movies, they range from anywhere from like 2.5, White Ghost, all the way up to like 4 and 4.5. But I don't really want to put numbers associated with these movies because they're just a fun energy to, watch and hopefully spread on to other people. It's a fun energy, right? But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please mind my rambling as I am sick, clearly. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm looking forward to joining in the next box set where we're going to cover the Mexico Macabre set from Indicator, and that's going to be a really great treat as well. Some gothic delights. I hope you can enjoy some Japanese horror films, and let me know what you've been watching in the comment section down below. Like, share, hit the notification bell, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. I'm not jonesing around.